They should have been worrying about homework, prom dates, and college applications. Instead, these kids were planning the murders of the people who gave them life. What you're about to hear are 8 true stories of children and teenagers who committed the ultimate family betrayal, killing their own parents in cold blood. One 17-year-old beat his mother and father to death with a hammer, then threw a massive house party with their bodies locked in the bedroom while 60 teenagers danced and drank just feet away. Another 16-year-old methodically murdered his entire family, parents, and 5 siblings in a killing spree that left only 2 survivors. We're talking about honor students who turned into family annihilators, seemingly normal kids who planned murders with chilling calculation, and teenagers who showed no remorse as they were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. From Idaho to Alabama, from Florida to Oklahoma, these cases span decades and expose a dark reality. Sometimes the most dangerous threat to a family comes from within. Before we dive into these disturbing true crime cases, let me know in the comments what time you're watching and where you're watching from. Now, let's meet the first killer on our list. Case 1. Sarah Marie Johnson. The honor student who chose her boyfriend over her parents, Sarah Marie Johnson was just 16 years old when she made a decision that would destroy her family and end her own future. From Bellevue, Idaho, Sarah appeared to be a completely normal teenager to anyone watching from the outside. She was an honor student who performed well academically and seemed to have a bright future ahead of her. But beneath that successful exterior, Sarah was hiding a dangerous secret. She was in a relationship with a much older man, a relationship her parents absolutely did not approve of. The age difference was significant, and the relationship was illegal given Sarah's age. When her parents discovered what was happening, they were understandably horrified. Sarah's victims were her own parents, 46-year-old Alan Johnson and 52-year-old Diane Johnson. Alan and Diane were loving, involved parents who tried to set appropriate boundaries for their teenage daughter. When they discovered Sarah's relationship with an older man, they did exactly what responsible parents should do. They forbade her from seeing him and threatened to report him to authorities for his illegal involvement with a minor. They were trying to protect Sarah from a relationship that could harm her. But Sarah saw her parents not as protectors, but as obstacles standing between her and what she wanted. She became completely obsessed with her boyfriend, willing to do absolutely anything to be with him, including committing the unthinkable. On the early morning of the 2nd of September 2003, in Bellevue, Idaho, Sarah shot both of her parents as they slept in their bed. She used a .264 caliber rifle, shooting her father in the chest and her mother in the head. Both died without ever knowing what was happening. After murdering them, Sarah tried to stage the scene to make it look like a robbery had occurred. She called 911, acting shocked and traumatized, initially presenting herself as a victim who had discovered her parents dead. But investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies in her story. Gunshot residue was found on Sarah's hands and clothing. The timeline she provided didn't match the physical evidence. Everything pointed directly to Sarah as the killer. Her boyfriend was questioned, and Sarah was eventually arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. Throughout the investigation and trial, Sarah maintained her innocence, refusing to admit what she had done. Sarah's trial took place in 2005, and the prosecution presented clear evidence of her motive. She wanted her parents out of the way so she could be with her older boyfriend. The defense claimed she was innocent, but the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah was found guilty on both counts of murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. She's currently incarcerated in Idaho, where she'll spend the rest of her life. Multiple appeals have been filed and denied over the years. The small community of Bellevue was absolutely shocked by the double murder. Sarah's parents had been well-liked members of the community, and people struggled to understand how their own daughter could have killed them. The case drew national attention and sparked difficult conversations about teenage relationships with older partners and the warning signs that parents should watch for. Sarah Johnson threw away her entire future for a relationship that would never have lasted anyway. Case 2. Tyler Hadley, the boy who threw a party with his parents' bodies in the house. Tyler Hadley was 17 years old and living in Port Street, Florida. when he committed one of the most disturbing murders in the state's history, not just because of what he did, but because of what he did afterward. Tyler was a high school student with a well-documented history of behavioral problems and mental health issues. He took prescription medications to help manage his conditions, but he was known for erratic, unpredictable behavior. Tyler desperately wanted to be popular and craved attention from his peers. He was impulsive, unstable, struggled with drug use, and seemed to have absolutely no regard for consequences. His parents had been trying for years to get him the help he needed. Tyler's victims were his own parents, 54-year-old Blake Hadley and 47-year-old Mary Jo Hadley. Blake and Mary Jo had struggled for years with Tyler's increasingly difficult behavior. They tried everything they could think of to help him, setting boundaries and rules they hoped would provide structure. Tyler deeply resented their authority and what he saw as their attempts to control him. His parents were concerned about his drug use and tried grounding him and implementing discipline. But Tyler only saw them as obstacles. The relationship had become increasingly strained, with constant conflict and tension in the household. On the 16th of July 2011, Tyler murdered both of his parents using a claw hammer. He beat his father to death with the hammer, then did the same to his mother. The attacks were brutal and violent, showing a level of rage that's difficult to comprehend. After killing them, Tyler locked their bodies in the master bedroom. He then cleaned up the blood as best he could. And here's where this case becomes truly shocking. Tyler then threw a massive house party. He invited people over through social media, and more than 60 teenagers showed up. The party lasted for hours, with music blaring, drugs being passed around, and alcohol flowing freely. All the while, Tyler's parents' bodies were locked in the bedroom just down the hall. At some point during the party, Tyler told one friend what he had done. That friend eventually called the police. When officers arrived, they discovered the bodies and arrested Tyler at the scene. He showed very little remorse for what he had done. Tyler was charged with 2 counts of murder, and his trial took place in 2014. The defense tried to argue that Tyler's mental illness had caused him to snap, that he wasn't fully responsible for his actions. But the prosecution presented evidence showing premeditation. Tyler had planned this, obtaining the hammer beforehand and choosing when to strike. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and Tyler was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the crime cold and calculated, noting that Tyler's decision to throw a party with his parents' bodies in the house showed a disturbing lack of humanity. Tyler is currently incarcerated in Florida, where he'll spend the rest of his life. The case became so infamous that it inspired both a book and a documentary. Port Street Lucie was absolutely horrified by the murders, but what shocked the community even more was the party. The fact that Tyler had thrown a massive gathering with his parents' dead bodies just feet away traumatized not just the community but also the teenagers who had attended. Many of them had no idea what had happened until police arrived. The case raised urgent questions about mental health warning signs and how they can be missed even when someone is receiving treatment. National media picked up the story, and it became one of the most talked about parricide cases in recent American history. Case 3. Michael Bever, the teen who helped murder his entire family. Michael Bever was 16 years old when he participated in one of the most horrific family annihilations in Oklahoma history. From Broken Arrow, Michael and his family were homeschooled, which meant the children had limited interaction with peers outside the home. Michael became increasingly isolated and developed a dangerous obsession with violence and mass murder. He wasn't alone in these dark fantasies. His 18-year-old brother Robert shared his interests. Together, they planned an attack on their own family with chilling calculation. Both brothers wanted notoriety, dreaming of becoming famous murderers whose names would be remembered. They documented their plans online, collected weapons, and showed absolutely no empathy for the people they were planning to kill: their own parents and siblings. The victims were Michael's parents and 5 of his siblings. Their father, David Bever, was 52 years old. Their mother, April Bever, was 44. The children killed in the attack were 12-year-old Daniel, 7-year-old Christopher, and 5-year-old Victoria. 2 siblings survived the horrific assault: 13-year-old Crystal and 2-year-old Orton. The Bevers were a large homeschool family, and by all accounts, David and April were devoted to their children. They had no idea that two of their sons were planning to murder them all. On the 22nd of July 2015, in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, Michael and Robert Bever attacked their entire family using knives and a hatchet. They went room by room in a systematic killing spree. Their father David was stabbed 28 times, their mother April was stabbed multiple times, 3 young children were murdered in the attack. 13-year-old Crystal managed to survive by playing dead after being stabbed, a quick thinking decision that saved her life. She waited until the brothers moved on, then escaped and called 911. 2-year-old Orton also survived the attack. The brothers had planned to continue their killing spree beyond the family home, wanting to become famous mass murderers. But police arrived while the attack was still in progress, and both brothers were arrested. The crime scene was absolutely horrific, with evidence of the planning found throughout the house. Journals detailing their plot were recovered. Both Michael and Robert were charged with 5 counts of murder. Robert, being over 18, was initially sentenced to death, though that sentence was later commuted to life in prison. Michael was tried separately because he was a juvenile at the time of the murders. His trial took place in 2018, and he was found guilty on all counts. Michael Bever was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, 5 consecutive life terms. The judge noted the unspeakable evil of the crimes, calling it one of the most horrific cases he had ever encountered. Both brothers are currently incarcerated in Oklahoma, where they'll spend the rest of their lives. The community of Broken Arrow was absolutely devastated by the family annihilation. The murder of 5 family members, including 3 young children, shocked not just Oklahoma but the entire nation. The community mourned the victims and struggled to understand how 2 brothers could murder their own family in such a brutal way. Questions were raised about the isolation that can come with homeschooling and whether warning signs had been visible online in the brothers' posts. The case received extensive national attention and remains one of the most horrifying examples of family violence in American history. Case 4. David Brom, the honor student who killed his family with an axe. David Brom was 16 years old and living in Rochester, Minnesota, when he committed a quadruple murder that shocked his community. To everyone who knew him, David seemed like a model teenager. He was an honor student who excelled academically, played in the school band, and appeared well-adjusted and successful. But beneath that normal exterior, David was experiencing increasing tension with his father. They argued frequently about David's future plans, particularly about college and what David would do after high school. David's father, Bernard, was a very strict authoritarian who controlled the household with rigid rules. David felt increasingly suffocated and controlled, and resentment was building inside him. People close to the family had noticed concerning changes in David's behavior, but no one imagined what was coming. David's victims were his entire immediate family. His father, Bernard Brom, was 43 years old, and his mother, Paulette, was also 43. His brother Rickard was 18, and his sister Diane was 14. Bernard was known as a strict, controlling figure who ruled the household with an iron fist. David clashed with his father constantly, particularly over expectations about college and David's future. The other family members, David's mother, brother, and sister, were caught in the middle of this conflict. David didn't have major conflicts with his siblings, they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. On the 18th of February 1988, in Rochester, Minnesota, David Brom killed his entire family using an axe. He started with his father Bernard, killing him in the basement of their home. He then killed his mother Paulette, his brother Rickard, and his sister Diane, all with an axe or hatchet. The attacks were brutal and violent, showing a level of rage that's difficult to comprehend. After murdering his entire family, David left the house and wandered around Rochester. Eventually, he went to a friend's house and confessed to what he had done. The friend immediately called police, and David was arrested peacefully. He showed a disturbing emotional numbness, appearing disconnected from the gravity of what he had done. David led police back to his house where the bodies were discovered. When asked why he had killed his family, David couldn't provide a clear explanation. David Brom was charged with 4 counts of murder, and his trial took place in 1989. The defense argued that David was insane at the time of the murders, that he wasn't in control of his actions or fully aware of what he was doing. But the prosecution presented evidence showing that David had planned the attacks and knew exactly what he was doing. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and David was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. He's currently incarcerated in Minnesota, where he's been for over 3 decades. David has been denied parole multiple times and remains in prison, where he'll likely spend the rest of his life. Rochester was absolutely shocked by the quadruple murder. The fact that an honor student, someone who seemed to have everything going for him, had killed his entire family was incomprehensible to the community. People mourned the loss of the entire Brom family and questioned what warning signs might have been missed. Discussions centered on family dynamics and the pressure that strict parenting can create. The case remains infamous in Minnesota and continues to be studied by criminologists and psychologists trying to understand what drives seemingly normal teenagers to commit such horrific acts of family violence. Case 5. Mason Sisk, the 4-year-old who killed 5 family members. Mason Sisk was just 14 years old when he committed one of the most shocking family annihilations in Alabama history. From Limestone County, Mason was a middle school student with a deeply troubled background. He had a long history of behavioral problems and violence that had concerned his family for years. His parents had tried desperately to get him help, taking him to counselors and therapists for anger management issues. But Mason showed concerning behaviors that continued to escalate. He was resentful toward his family, fascinated with violence, and showed absolutely no empathy for others. Despite all the warning signs, no one could have predicted what was coming. Mason's victims were his father and 3 young siblings. His father, John Sisk, was 38 years old, and his stepmother, Mary Sisk, was 35. The children killed were 6-year-old Cain, 6-year-old Aurelia, and 5-year-old Rory. Mason lived with his family in their Alabama home, but the relationship had become increasingly strained. There were frequent conflicts between Mason and his parents, who tried various forms of discipline to address his behavior problems, but Mason deeply resented any form of authority or control. On the 2nd of September 2019, in Limestone County, Alabama, Mason shot his entire family using a 9mm handgun. He shot his father John first, then his stepmother Mary, and then turned the gun on his 3 young siblings' children who were just 5 and 6 years old. All 5 victims were killed in the family home. After murdering his family, Mason called 911 and claimed that someone had broken into the house and killed everyone. He acted like a traumatized survivor, the only one who had escaped the attack. But investigators quickly saw through his story. There was no forced entry into the home, and Mason's account of what happened was inconsistent and didn't match the physical evidence. Gunshot residue was found on Mason's hands. When confronted with the evidence, Mason eventually confessed. He claimed the voices had told him to kill his family, a claim that investigators found difficult to believe given other evidence. Throughout the process, Mason showed very little emotion. At just 14 years old, he had become one of the youngest family annihilators in American history. Mason Sisk was charged with 5 counts of murder and, despite his age, was tried as an adult due to the severity and premeditated nature of the crimes. His trial took place in 2021. The defense argued that Mason was suffering from serious mental illness and wasn't fully responsible for his actions. But the prosecution presented evidence showing that Mason had planned the murders, obtaining the gun beforehand and choosing his moment to strike. The jury found him guilty on all 5 counts of murder. Mason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, 5 consecutive life terms. He's currently incarcerated in Alabama, where he'll spend the rest of his life. Limestone County was absolutely devastated by the murders. An entire family had been wiped out, including 3 small children. The community mourned the 5 victims and struggled to comprehend how a 14-year-old could commit such violence. Questions were raised about mental health warning signs and whether more could have been done to prevent the tragedy. Mason Sisk remains one of the youngest family killers in recent American memory, a reminder that age is no barrier to evil. Case 6. Ethan Orton, the teen who felt too much pressure. Ethan Orton was 18 years old and living in Boise, Idaho. when he murdered both of his parents in an act he would later claim was driven by overwhelming pressure. Ethan was a recent high school graduate who was still living at home with his parents. He had a history of family conflict and was struggling with mental health issues that made him feel misunderstood and isolated. Ethan harbored growing resentment toward his parents, particularly around conflicts about his future plans. His parents were pushing him hard about college and his career path, and Ethan felt increasingly trapped. He showed concerning behavior that worried those around him, but no one intervened before it was too late. Ethan's victims were both of his parents, Michael Orton and Bonnie Orton. Michael and Bonnie were professionals in the Boise community who were trying to guide their son towards success. They set expectations for Ethan's future, wanting him to go to college and build a good life for himself. From their perspective, they were doing what all good parents do, encouraging their child to reach his potential. But Ethan felt pressured rather than supported. Arguments between them became increasingly frequent as Ethan pushed back against their expectations. Communication in the household broke down completely, with Ethan feeling that his parents didn't understand him and his parents worried about their son's future. In March 2020, in Boise, Idaho, Ethan killed both of his parents. He shot his father Michael and his mother Bonnie, and both died in their home. After committing the murders, Ethan left the house and drove around for a while. Eventually, he made the decision to turn himself in to police. When he confessed, Ethan said he had felt overwhelmed by the pressure his parents were putting on him. He claimed he couldn't take it anymore and had snapped. But when investigators examined the evidence, they found that Ethan had obtained the gun beforehand, suggesting premeditation rather than a spontaneous breakdown. The evidence showed planning and calculation. Throughout his confession, Ethan showed some remorse for what he had done. But there was also a disturbing detachment, as if he couldn't fully process the magnitude of killing his own parents. Police went to the Orton home and discovered the bodies. The community was shocked to everyone who knew them. The Ortons had seemed like a normal, successful family. Ethan Orton was charged with 2 counts of murder. Rather than go to trial, Ethan pleaded guilty, accepting responsibility for what he had done. His sentencing took place in 2021. Ethan received 2 life sentences with the possibility of parole after serving several decades. The judge took into consideration Ethan's mental health struggles and the pressure he had been feeling, but also noted that there was clear premeditation in obtaining the gun and planning the murders. Ethan is currently incarcerated in Idaho, where he'll spend many decades before having any chance at freedom. The Boise community was shocked by the double murder. Michael and Bonnie Orton had been known professionally in the community, and to outsiders, they had seemed like a normal family with a bright future. The case sparked important discussions about the pressure that teenagers and young adults face regarding their futures, particularly around college and career expectations. Questions were raised about mental health support and how to recognize when a young person is struggling under too much pressure. The Orton case serves as a tragic reminder of what can happen when family communication breaks down and mental health issues go unaddressed. Case 7. Bruno Santos, the son who killed his immigrant parents. Bruno Santos was 18 years old and living in Newark, New Jersey, when he murdered both of his parents in a crime that would devastate his community. Bruno was a recent high school graduate who still lived at home with his family. He had a documented history of behavioral issues and struggled with drug use problems that had created ongoing conflict with his parents. Bruno was resentful of authority, constantly pushing back against his parents' rules. He wanted complete independence and freedom, and there were frequent financial disputes. Bruno felt disrespected by his parents and was capable of violence when he didn't get his way. Bruno's victims were his father and mother, hard-working immigrants who had come to America hoping to build a better life for their family. They worked incredibly hard to provide for Bruno and tried to give him opportunities they had never had themselves. Bruno's parents set strict rules because they wanted their son to succeed and not waste the opportunities they had sacrificed to give him. They wanted a better life for Bruno than they had experienced. But Bruno deeply resented their expectations and what he saw as their attempts to control him. There were cultural conflicts and a significant generation gap between Bruno and his parents. His parents were disappointed in the choices Bruno was making, particularly his drug use and behavioral problems. In Newark, New Jersey, Bruno killed both of his parents using a knife. He stabbed his father multiple times and did the same to his mother. Both died in their home from their injuries. After committing the murders, Bruno left the scene and went to a friend's house, trying to establish an alibi for himself. He wanted people to believe he had been somewhere else when the murders occurred. But the bodies were discovered by a relative who had come to check on the family. The investigation led quickly to Bruno. Evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic evidence, witness statements, and his own inconsistent stories all pointed to his guilt. Bruno was arrested and initially denied any involvement in the murders, but eventually, under questioning, he confessed. Bruno claimed that he and his parents had argued about money and that he had lost control, but evidence showed that this wasn't a spontaneous act of rage Bruno had prepared beforehand, obtaining the knife and planning when to strike. Bruno Santos was charged with 2 counts of murder. His trial presented clear evidence of premeditation despite his claims that he had simply lost control. The jury found him guilty on both counts of murder. Bruno was sentenced to life in prison, 2 consecutive life terms. He must serve several decades before becoming eligible for parole consideration. During sentencing, the judge condemned the heinous nature of the crime, noting that Bruno had murdered the 2 people who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. Bruno is currently incarcerated in New Jersey. The Newark community was deeply saddened by this immigrant family tragedy. Bruno's parents were remembered as hardworking people who had come to America with dreams of a better life for their son. Their deaths sparked discussions about the pressures faced by immigrant families, the cultural expectations placed on children, and the generation gaps that can create conflict. The community mourned the loss of 2 people who had worked so hard and sacrificed so much, only to be killed by the son they had tried to help succeed. And there you have it, teenagers who committed the ultimate family betrayal by murdering their own parents. From Sarah Marie Johnson, who killed her parents because they disapproved of her older boyfriend, to Mason Sisk, who at just 14 years old shot his father, stepmother, and 3 young siblings. What's striking is the variety of motives. Some killed because they felt controlled, others out of rebellion, some because of pressure and expectations, and a few out of pure obsession. The methods varied too, from shooting to stabbing to beating with hammers and axes. The age range spanned from 14 to 18 years old. Tyler Hadley's case stands out as particularly disturbing, throwing a party with 60 teenagers while his parents' bodies were locked in the bedroom. Michael Bever's case is equally horrifying, killing 5 family members including young children. All will spend decades in prison before even being considered for parole. Looking at these cases together, clear patterns emerge. Family conflict that escalated over time, complete breakdowns in communication, underlying mental health issues that weren't adequately addressed, and warning signs that were present but not recognized or acted upon. These kids threw away their entire futures in moments of rage or calculated planning. The victims' families were destroyed, and entire communities were left devastated, struggling to understand how children could kill the people who gave them life. These cases underscore the critical importance of recognizing warning signs early, the absolute necessity of mental health intervention when behaviors become concerning, and how crucial family communication is in preventing tragedy. If someone you know is struggling, seek help before it's too late. If this opened your eyes to the realities of family violence, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment, what time are you watching, where are you from, and which case shocked you the most. Thanks for watching, and remember, the warning signs are almost always there if we know how to see them.